Hello, welcome to the next episode of podcast Okno do sveta, Window to the World. My name is Miroslav Wlachovsky. I served as a Slovak foreign minister last year, and currently I'm associated as a distinguished fellow at the Globsecu. And my today guest is U.S. Ambassador to Slovakia, His Excellency Gautamom A. Welcome, Gautam.
Thank you, Miro. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm very glad you accepted my invitation, and we discuss in this podcast of obviously international relations. And these days, the biggest issue, of course, is defense and security. How do you assess the recent development in Ukraine, which is our neighbor, after the peace conference in Switzerland, and how we are in the third year of this Russian aggression against Ukraine from American perspective, and especially from American perspective based here in Slovakia?
Let me begin by saying thank you very much, Miro, for inviting me to this program. I also want to thank you for your service to Slovakia. You are a fantastic foreign minister. You are a fantastic diplomat, and we've always had a terrific relationship, and I think you accomplished a great deal. And I want to make sure that you get the credit you deserve for all the great work you did during an extremely difficult time. You're absolutely right. Defense and security policy right now are essential to European security, to Slovak security, especially the situation next door. Let's start big picture and then work our way down a little bit. First of all, I think Europe is in a significantly better shape today than it was in the past. Why do I say this? Now, 20 of the 32 allies, NATO allies, are up to 2% of defense spending. This is a significant increase over the last few years because I think allies realize the importance of this collective defense and of spending for their own defense to be part of this larger framework of what will protect Europe from Russian and other aggression. And so I think in that sense, Europe has made great strides forward. In terms of what's going on in Ukraine, obviously, as you noted, we are into the third year of the conflict. The Ukrainians have the Russians at a standstill. Who would have thought this back in February 2022, that 3 years later, that Russia and Ukraine are essentially at a standstill? Unfortunately, Russia's full-scale war has created great havoc and destruction in Ukraine. Russia's crimes against humanity in terms of kidnapping children, targeting civilian populations, battlefield tactics are horrible. And it's for those reasons that the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. So the situation remains challenging. All credit must go to the Ukrainian people for their courage, for maintaining their steadfastness against this Russian aggression. But let's also give credit to the West and to NATO allies for stepping forward, for providing Ukraine assistance, training, military material, including, of course, Slovakia, which famously donated the S-300 system, donated MiG-29s, which I think history will show us that the MiG-29 donation was extremely important. I leave legal issues to the Slovak people to decide, but I think great credit must be given to the Slovak government for donating that at a critical time. And I think when history looks back on these decisions, they will look back and say, these were the right decisions, that these were the decisions that protected Slovakia. These were the decisions that protected the European people.
I agree with you because we have a saying in Slovak that who gives fast gives twice.
Yes,
and that's what happened in case of Ukraine. The fact that we gave MiG-29s and S-300 in the time of need was absolutely crucial. But we are now in the third year of this conflict, and we can see what originally was thought perhaps as a 2 weeks campaign with the idea of a victory march in Kiev streets became a war of attrition, and I think the support of the West is absolutely crucial for Ukraine. However, sometimes we are a bit slow, and what I see there is that people get tired of it.
Yeah.
People are absolutely tired. So we have to take it in mind that Ukraine is defending the whole Europe right now, and approach it like this. In the meantime, there was a change of government in Slovakia. We had a parliamentary elections in September. What does it change in your cooperation with Slovak government vis-a-vis Ukraine, and because Prime Minister Fico famously said that his government will not send a lethal weapons to Ukraine, but how is it going when it comes to other things?
So, first and foremost, Slovakia is a member of NATO, is a EU partner for the United States. We continue to have close cooperation on all sorts of defense and security matters. We, of course, respect the sovereignty of Slovakia and the sovereign decisions that any government might make. But we continue to work very closely and cooperatively with Slovakia, as with all of our NATO allies, in continuing to help our Ukrainian friends. The Slovak government has also said that they will continue to providing economic and humanitarian assistance. Minister Konak and Prime Minister Fico have also spoken about providing military material which is produced by Slovak industry, and this is what other firms and countries are also doing. So I think overall the assistance to Ukraine remains, and what I also commend the government on is that it has consistently supported Ukraine and in Brussels at NATO and EU meetings, including agreeing to a pathway for ascension into the European Union, as well as providing $50 billion in further assistance. So I think, again, I defer to the government for, and I refer you to their statements, but I think our cooperation remains strong in supporting Ukraine.
That's very good. And when we talk about this Russian aggression and this war, we usually talk about the conflict which started in 2020.
Yeah.
But actually, it started much earlier. It started in 2014 with the annexation of Ukraine, and what we also seen since that time is a sort of a hybrid war, and the Russian influence operation in Europe, in America, and from this point of view, it seems to me that we started to react quite late to that kind of Russian activities, and especially in my country, in Slovakia, I think we let the disinformation, misinformation, and hybrid war on our territory for too long. But what do you think about Russian operations in Central Europe?
Yeah.
How do you see it as an American ambassador based here in Central Europe? What do you discuss with your colleagues from the region? Because I think in this asymmetric tactics, Russia seems to be quite successful.
Yeah. So we were just talking about the soft camera, which is the notion of being able to take a step back and looking at the larger picture of history. Disinformation has always existed, and disinformation has been part of, I think, international politics since time immemorial. The Nazis famously, Goebbels famously came up with the big lie, where you just keep repeating something endlessly until the people believe it. And Nazi propaganda and disinformation were quite extensive during the Cold War. Soviet tactics were renowned for their disinformation, their propagation of disinformation. So these tactics, let me take that. Disinformation has always existed. The tactics, of course, have changed in the modern world, especially with the rise of the internet and social media and technology, and the ability to target in a way that we haven't had before. But I think the tools to counter disinformation remain the same, which includes education, which includes critical analysis and thinking, which includes making sure that I don't want to say correct information, but the information which can be verified, which is factually true, unlike disinformation, that we are engaging in that. You're absolutely right. And where I do agree with you is that the Russians have been extremely effective over the last decade in propagating their disinformation throughout Central Europe, throughout the world. And so this is a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge, partly, again, because the methods of disinformation, we're still trying to figure out how to address them, right? Because we want to support free speech. We want to support people engaging in thought, in debate, in conversation. That's what we stand for. Those are our values. But how do you do that when your enemy is obviously spreading lies and trying to undermine the democracies, undermine our faith in ourselves? And it's a fundamental challenge that we're all dealing with, and we're trying to figure out the best ways of responding to it. But what we believe we need to do, all of us, is, again, what I've just outlined: educational, developing critical thinking capabilities, developing tools to counter disinformation, and to sort of acknowledge that it exists, and then to try to, again, figure out, as the tactics change, how to respond to them. And I don't have a perfect answer. Let me end by that.
Yeah.
I think we're all struggling with this. This is not a Slovak problem. This is a global problem.
Yeah, I think one can feel it also in the U.S. In the information space. There is a lot of misinformations, and it sometimes it has even comical side of it. There is a group of people who believe that the Earth is flat. So we went a couple of centuries back due to these informations when it comes to healthcare.
Absolutely.
It's also there is a movement against immaculation and things like that. So it is a big problem, but. When we speak about Russian influence, we also have a challenge that for them it's not that difficult to penetrate our space because we are open societies. But for us, it's rather difficult to get the information to the Russian people, to give them a different view of the world. During the Cold War, we had several tools. Then we had decided that it's time to pay a Cold War dividend, and the Soviet studies became less funded in the U.S. The institutions like Radio Free Europe was less funded. Do you think it's a time to come back and think more about how to defend our way of life and how to actually spread information into Russia? Just not be only on the defense, but to be a bit of counteroffensive?
Well, I think it's a very good question, and I'll leave that to others at a higher pay grade to look at this on a more strategic level. I feel though that it's already happening. I'll tell you why I believe that's happening. After the Russian full-scale invasion, the estimates that I've seen are almost 1 million to 2 million Russians left. Why? Because they actually knew the truth of what was going on, that they were aware of what their country was doing, right? I mean, Putin just won his re-election with, 88% of the vote, and they're developing, similar to the Chinese, a similar Great Wall of China, Great Wall of Russia. But during the Soviet era, we always wonder, like, how much do the Soviet people know? They actually knew. They knew a lot more than was going on. But right now, in Putin's Russia, any sort of freedom assembly is destroyed. They arrest people for protesting the government. They, we know this. Obviously, what happened to the opposition, Navalny, it's terrible. And so I think it's hard to know exactly what the Russian people know and how much they can protest. But I think the same tools that they use against us, the freedom of the internet, you can put up walls, but you can always get around those walls in modern technology. And my sense is the Russian people know far more than we think they do because of the information that's leaking in. I think the larger issue is that I think Russia is a declining power. We've talked about this also offline. If you look at its demographics, it is a country in rapid demographic decline. Its economy is fully based on hydrocarbons, and hydrocarbons which, in a world that is moving rapidly towards green energies, it's a country that is dependent more and more on China and North Korea to provide it basic industrial products and defense products. I just don't see how this is sustainable for Russia. Unfortunately, Mr. Putin doesn't seem to care about the Russian people. He doesn't seem to care about his country. So this is going to be a short-term challenge. But I think Russia, similar to the Soviet Union, I see a lot of parallels, and I could be wrong, with where the Soviet Union was in 1984, 1985, where the West and the rest of us were looking at what was happening in Afghanistan and it looked like they were winning. It looked like the Russian dominance in its sphere of influence was expanding when in fact it was rotting from the inside. And I think we see a lot of parallels with that today.
You mentioned China and China's support for Russia in this conflict, and actually the current NATO Secretary General, Mr. Stoltenberg, mentioned it quite openly in the recent days that China should think twice about how they support Russia, and there might be consequences even for China for this. But you also suggested that Russia became more and more dependent on China. So this creates a new kind of a relations, new equilibrium. But for the U.S., China seems to be quite a challenge or headache in a sense of strategic rival. So, what do you think about the China as you see it now? With Russia in tandem and vis-a-vis Taiwan, which is a big question for you.
Absolutely. So the President's national security strategy explicitly notes that America's primary competitors for the 21st century are going to be China and Russia, and particularly this administration, the previous administration, if you go back to the Obama administration, have acknowledged not only the rise of China and that we welcome it. I mean that was that was an essential part of U.S. foreign policy and what we were saying 12 years ago. But we want China to abide by the rules of the road that it has signed on to. So, for example, WTO and economics, they're currently dumping their products. Their factories are expanding rapidly. They're dumping products. And what Europe now is taking a look at this, and the recent tariff increases on Chinese electric vehicles, because there's a realization that the Chinese are subsidizing this in violation of the rules of the road that they signed on to as part of the WTO. Similarly, the Biden administration has strongly criticized and spoken with China about its support for Russia's defense industrial base. And this is of huge concern to us. Just last week, and maybe the week before, we announced hundreds of sanctions against Russian and Chinese entities because of this support. We are extremely concerned about the support that North Korea is also providing Russia. And so this is of concern. The United States has issued a number of sanctions. It's something we watch closely. But we also realize that China is going to be a competitor for the 21st century. And we welcome the rise of China. But we hope that China abides by the rules of the road, and as you noted, Taiwan does not invade Taiwan, and that it remains a good neighbor.
When we speak about Russia and its war against West, because it's not only about Ukraine, it's simply much bigger. Part of it, even before the Russian full-scale invasion into Ukraine, was the weaponization of energy. And the energy security as part of a big security issues. You live in Slovakia for a couple of years. We are the country which was in many ways heavily dependent on Russian sources of energy, but the whole Europe was in a way very much dependent on the sources of Russian energy when it comes to gas, when it comes to oil, and when it comes to even a nuclear fuel. I know that Slovak governments, consecutive Slovak governments, try to deal with this issue, and with your help, where are the negotiations when it comes to energy security between Slovakia and the U.S., and how do you help us?
Yeah, again, great question. Let me start again, I think macro with Russia, and then we can go maybe more micro on Slovakia. I think this is an area, again, long term, where Russia is going to pay a huge penalty for its full-scale invasion. Prior to February 24, 2022, the vast majority of its hydrocarbons and its energy production went to Europe, whether natural gas pipelines, oil, nuclear fuel, all of that. And all of this has changed very rapidly in the last 2 years. And now it's looking for new clients. Of course, India and China are purchasing vast quantities, but it's more expensive for the Russians, and it's going to be difficult for them to build pipelines. They've been in long-term negotiations with the Chinese for a natural gas pipeline, which is still ongoing. Gazprom just declared that it was in deficit last year. So
for the first time in history,
for the first time in history, exactly, which I think is fascinating, right? And what is also really fascinating is that gas prices spiked immediately after the conflict, but now have returned to historic levels. Why is that? In large part because the United States and other producers have stepped up. Let's look at Slovakia particularly. On February 23rd, 2022, your energy mix was 100% Russian oil, 100% Russian nuclear fuel, and 85% Russian natural gas. Today, it's about 30 to 35% natural gas. You signed a deal with Westinghouse last year, Slovakia did, and so you're going to be moving off of the Russian nuclear fuel going forward. The oil, I think there's hope that once your refineries are adapted, there might be opportunities to bring in oil from other parts of the world. This government, the Fico government, has announced that it will hopes to do a new nuclear project, with Minister Sakova explicitly said would be done with a non-Russian partner. So there's been a huge change in just 2 years. What also I thought was fascinating is that the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Association, I forget the acronym, but IAEA, said that one of the aspects of the Russian full-scale invasion is that it's speeded up the green energy transition in Europe, which is rapidly happening. And it's happening in the United States. It's happening in China. And once again, the Russian economy is so highly dependent on the hydrocarbons, and I don't think it's going to be ready for this green energy transition, which is happening right now. I think Slovakia is well placed. I think you've come a long way. The government that you were part of helped with that process. This government continues, and I think Europe will continue utilizing more and more green energy.
And how is it in America when it comes to the green energy? How is your transformation into this?
Yeah, it's happening. It's happening far more rapidly than I think people realize. I think the president's IRA, it's called Inflation Reduction Act, but it actually was very focused on creating investment opportunities for green energy and clean energy. And the amount of investment has just skyrocketed. And you're not going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. I think once the economies of scale increase, and they're happening in wind, in solar, in battery production, it's just gonna go faster and faster. And I think we're seeing that in the United States. Obviously, we still have climate change as a major issue. We need to do more, but the technological revolution is happening.
You came to our country a couple of years ago. What is something you've been surprised by, if there is anything?
Well, I talk about this, and I don't. I always want to put this gently. I was surprised at how pessimistic Slovaks can often be, and
okay, good point. I agree.
I feel as an outsider, because I'm not Slovak. I'm not. My heritage is not from Central Europe. I have lived in 11 countries around the world. I've lived in South Asia, I've lived in Central America, I've lived in America, I was born in India, I've lived in North Africa, the Middle East. Slovakia is an amazing country. You've come so far, and you look at your history, right? And you achieve your full and true independence in 1993, and in 30 years you have accomplished so much, including the fabulous decisions to join NATO and the European Union back in 2004. And by every single socioeconomic indicator, Slovakia has come so far in 30 years. Far further than so many other countries around the world. And to me, you are an incredible success story. And the Slovak people have achieved so much. And I think you have so much to be proud of. And of course, there are challenges now. There are always challenges. But I'm confident for your future. I'm confident about where Europe is going. I realize there's a conflict next door, and I realize the Ukrainian people are suffering, and I hope they get through this in a positive way. I hope Europe does. But I'm very confident about Slovakia's future, and I tend to be far more confident about Slovakia's future than I think a lot of Slovaks.
Yeah. That's fascinating. You see the glass half full. We see the glass half empty, and it is a problem, I think, a bit because. According to your optimism and feelings, you do things. So it would be great if we would be more optimistic about our future, even though there are challenges. But we are not in war. We are part of EU and NATO, which guarantees us a lot when it comes not only to security but also prosperity.
Absolutely.
To be part of these two organizations means that the investments come to Slovakia, which leads to another question: how do you see the economic cooperation between the U.S. and Slovakia and investment? One of the biggest investment. We mentioned for a couple of years was U.S. Steel, but when it comes to modern technologies, when it comes to R&D, how we are doing in that cooperation these days?
I think we're doing well, and I think there's always room for expansion. From 2016 to 2021, the bilateral trade between the United States and Slovakia increased from approximately 2.8 billion to 5.4 billion, a significant increase. And then, of course, COVID happened, and I think the numbers dipped, and I think they're coming back. But again, I think there's a lot of opportunities, particularly the three areas where I think the United States will be a world leader, will continue to be a world leader, and I think are going to be essential to the global economy are one, clean energies that we've talked about. Two is the biomedical revolution that's going on. Life sciences. And three is AI. And the United States, again, remains a world leader on all of those. And I think these are areas, of course, that Europe and the European Union is also very concerned about. Because Slovakia is part of the European Union, a lot of our trade is going to come through the EU. Yeah. And so, but it remains very robust, and particularly Slovakia actually exports far more to the United States than imports from the United States, and it is particularly the car industry and car parts and whatnot. I think that will continue. But you also have a very tech-savvy population. I've met some fabulous entrepreneurs throughout Slovakia, and I think there's going to be continued opportunity there. I don't know exactly where I can pinpoint it right now, but I'm pretty confident that in these areas, as well as the car industry, will continue expanding.
Traditionally, the relations between Slovaks and Americans are strong because a lot of our ancestors went to the United States to find a better life, and I have it in my family. My great grandfather was in America. My wife's great grandfather went to America, but still we have an anti-Americanism here in this country, but in general. Why is it so? Is there something you are doing about it?
We're trying. No, I have thought about this question deeply since I arrived here, and I think it's a very complicated answer. But you're absolutely right. My understanding is that after the Irish, the Slovaks had the highest per capita emigration to the United States. We trace almost 3 million people of American heritage. There are 3 million Americans who trace their heritage back to Slovakia. So there is this linkage. I mean, Slovaks helped build the great cities of our Midwest, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Cleveland. You worked in the steel mills, you worked the coal mines. And of course, it went both ways. The great Czech-Slovak leaders met in Cleveland in 1915 and signed the Cleveland Agreement. In 1918, the Pittsburgh Agreement, President Wilson had a huge influence in the creation of Czechoslovakia. So we've had this long.
We have a statue
history
of President Wilson at the MFA.
And formerly, but Wilsonova, right? I mean, so there's this long history. You're absolutely right. And what is also interesting, and I cannot deny it, that there is, if you look at the statistics, our rankings are quite low, but this is not new. And this is why I said this is something I've been grappling with. So I've looked very closely at the Globsecu trends reports, right? And there's a couple of really fascinating data streams from my perspective. One, going back to 2016, Slovaks, only about 21% of Slovaks felt that they belonged part of the West. It actually increased to something about 34% as of 2023, right? Only about a third, right? If you look at anti-Americanism, and again, it's not really spelled out explicitly, but seeing America as a strategic partner was only about 18% back in 2016. It's risen to about 23%. So it's actually increased, right? It's the opposite of anti-Americanism. But at the same time, those who saw Russia as a strategic partner, it was almost over 40%. So why is it that in 2016, prior to Ukraine, right? Okay, Crimea happened, of course, in 2014. This is a decade after entry into NATO, a decade after entry into the EU, 23 years after independence. Why do so many Slovaks still feel this cultural and historic affinity to Russia, even though you're so firmly anchored in the West? I don't know. I can offer you my thoughts, but I think I leave this to the PhDs. But this is a larger issue. And you asked, what are we doing about it? Well, we're getting out. We're talking to people across the country. When I came here after COVID, our slogan was back to the regions. We tried to go and visit as much of the country as we can and try to talk to people one-on-one and to just have that human interaction. We promote exchanges. We love for Slovaks to go visit the United States. Our Fulbright program is strong and growing ever stronger. We talk to people like yourselves on podcasts and media as much as possible. But I think there is something deeper going on here, and I don't have an answer to that. I think it's a larger issue because it also gets into Slovak politics and Slovak culture. And I'd love for your thoughts on this. Why is it that so many Slovaks feel more anchored towards the East than the West? Because I've also thought of this offering all these Slovaks who may have this affinity for your neighbor to the east, giving them this thought experiment. Okay, you have a child, and this child, the son or daughter, could get a full scholarship to go to school in the United States, or could get a full scholarship to go to school in Russia. Where are you going to encourage them to go? Or just change that to, they have a job opportunity in Moscow versus New York. Where are you going to encourage them to go? I think we all know what the answer is, right? How many Slovak kids are learning English? How many Slovak kids are learning Russian, right? I mean, you are firmly anchored, and I think people, even on psychological level, are anchored in the West and have this affinity for Russia and for America and know this history between our countries. But there is something about this that I don't quite understand, and I think we're working on it.
Yeah, but what is interesting is that it is also used by Slovak politicians sometimes. They accuse other politicians that they are pro-American. Famously attacked person was our president, former President Zuzana Čaputová. That she get advices from the U.S. embassy. Let's put it straight. How do you deal with the politicians when they use anti-Americanism as a part of a campaign?
Yeah.
Do you speak with them directly then that they are incorrect?
Yeah. So, you know, as I said, I tend, because I've worked in so many countries and worked around the world, there's nothing new about this. There's an element to this. And then there's also the, labeling of people as pro-Russian, pro-American, whatnot. I leave the politics, to politicians. What I do know is President Čaputová was a fantastic president, and I think she strongly believed in, transatlantic values, in making Slovakia, a stronger, better country. I think she did a phenomenal job. And I told this to her the other day. I think she was the right person at the right time, at a critical moment in history, and she did an absolutely phenomenal job. And I'm confident that President Pellegrini will also do a terrific job. But the reality is Slovakia is firmly anchored in the West. You've joined NATO, you've joined EU, and we know that. And I think the Slovak people do. And you're absolutely right, there's politics. But I turn the question to you. Why? Because even before recent rhetoric, this has existed. What are your thoughts? Why do Slovaks have this sort of affinity for Russia? And what should we do about it?
Yeah, that's true. So you turn the table to me. Well, it is somehow historically anchored that Russia was viewed. We never believed in real Russia. That's or at least part of our population has some kind of mythical Russia, which is that huge country in the east, which will help Slavic people. It's from 19th century, but in reality, Russia came here in 1968 and invaded our country, at that time Czechoslovakia. So I'm fascinated by this phenomenon that we believe in something which does not exist, some kind of kind Russia, and at the same time we are criticizing our friends in the groupings where we actually are firmly anchored, as you said. We have to talk about it quite openly, and we have to address it quite directly. That's my answer to this, because otherwise we will be stuck in this kind of ambivalence. Because I don't think that the Slovaks actually are crazy pro-Russian. That's not true.
I agree.
That's absolutely not true. But they would love to be in between East-West, in some kind of panacea where nothing will touch us. But we are living in a real world, and we have to choose our friends, we have to choose our allies, and we have to behave accordingly. And what I like about the President Čaputová was that she was actually living the Slovak security and foreign relations doctrine. She behaved accordingly.
No, I agree with you. And I think you put your finger on it. This myth, of Russia and whatnot. But Slovakia's made its choices. It joined EU. It's joined NATO. It's firmly in the West. This government has repeatedly said that. President Pellegrini has said that. Your actions repeatedly demonstrate that you are part of the West, that you are part of the NATO, you are part of EU, and I think this will continue. I also believe as the world changes, as your younger population, again, I've been overwhelmed by the quality of English speakers in this country, especially among younger populations, the influence of the internet, travel opportunities, the opportunity to work throughout Europe. I think some of these attitudes, historical attitudes may change. But I'm confident about Slovakia's future. I'm confident about it being anchored in the West. And that's part of my job. It's part of the job of my embassy to get out, to talk to Slovak people, and to engage in this conversation.
And I think also we should have a better use of Slovaks who studied in America, who lived in America, who made their companies in America and became successful because what I would love to see, it's more optimism, more to look at the glass which is half full, and more of a kind of a pioneering spirit we need here, because we are a relatively young country. We are making our own story, and but we do not believe enough that it is us who creates the future for Slovakia. Somehow we tend to think it is a game of great powers, and we are more kind of an object than subject. So a little more confidence and a little more experience from America would help, I guess.
I'm all for it. People-to-people exchanges and the continuing sort of engagement, absolutely. And I come back to where I started, or I said earlier, you are, and you said yourself, you're a young country. Slovakia is only 30 years old. And so I think as in the years to come, you'll find that sort of core belief, core strength, and that you'll move forward because you've anchored yourself in the West.
Yeah, we have a long history, but we have a relatively new statehood, and we have to build our institution, and we have to learn a bit more how to run our things. But I think with help of friends like the US, we can actually succeed. I'm afraid that we are running out of the time. I'm not sure if I covered everything I wanted, because
I tend to filibuster a lot.
It's you can discuss the whole world with the American ambassador, but I like to ask my guests to recommend us some book or about international relations, or what you find out interesting, if you can recommend us some podcast. But what would be the book you would recommend which is connected with the topic we discussed today?
You had asked me to provide two titles. I'll give you two. One is more of a it's not so much a historical tome, but Hans Morgenthau's Politics Among Nations. It's a classic work of international relations theory. It became sort of one of the seminal texts of international relations programs in the United States. Morgenthau was a German Jew who left during the 1930s. He wrote it. It's a classic work of realism, and it influenced basically all the foreign policy thinkers in the United States during the 50s, 60s, 70s. Kissinger was also influenced, and he and Morgenthau had a close relationship. And it's not that I'm a realist, but I think looking at international relations from a realist perspective offers insights, because I do think that
it helps a lot.
It helps a lot, but I don't think we forget values, because America is about values, the West is about values, NATO is about values, the EU is about values, and so this mix of realism and values, which I think has to be a part of foreign policy. But I think that strong basis, and I think Morgenthau provides that. And the second book I would recommend is actually by another academic, Michael Beckley. I forget the full title, but it's called Unrivaled, and then there's a longer thing. But Beckley, Beckley. And what it is I'm a big believer that America's best days are ahead of it, similar to Slovakia. I'm not one of these people who think, who's like grounded in pessimism about the world, especially the rise of China and whatnot. And I think Beckley provides, it's data-based. I mean, he looks at the data and sort of makes that argument that similarly, for economic reasons, military reasons, technology reasons, America's place in the world will remain. And so I'm truly confident of that too. And this doesn't mean that that we're not moving towards a multipolar world. I firmly believe that we are, but that's not a bad thing. But I also don't buy this argument that America is a declining power either.
And the West is declining.
And the West is declining. Absolutely not. I think we have ability, and we've shown it to not only just reinvent ourselves, but to recharge ourselves. Okay. And that comes from freedom.
Yeah, I agree completely. So, thank you, Gautam. Thank you for coming to our studio, and I hope perhaps next time we will have another opportunity.
Absolutely. Anytime. I'm honored to be here, and thank you again for this conversation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.